for those of you who have joined to hear about ALM, you're about to hear all about it. So handing over to Reece, who's going to talk about ALM, DevOps, the difference. Get your questions ready. Go, Reece.
Cool. Thanks, David. Yes, just before I go further, I'm going to couch this on the fact that I'm no expert in in ALM or DevOps. I've been interested in it for a bit. I've been playing with it quite a lot, and I've been speaking to a lot of different people. So what I'm going to do today really is introduce the guidelines, talk a little bit about what I found and what other people have found through digging through it, point out a few things that seem quite interesting out of it, and then we'll open up to discussion, because what I'm really interested in is what you guys are doing, what you guys are trying to do, what you have done, what you've seen before. So that's a big part of what we want to try and get out of this. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the icebreaker. We want people to be comfortable to talk, because we want to try and get more discussion kind of going on. I do have some slides, practically none, but I do have them. So 1 second, let me just go and jump over to there. So DevOps and the Power Platform. I should really have changed that particular thing, because we'll get into that in a second. I do love a stupid picture, so that's why that's up there. That's probably my little fun fact I didn't go through myself. I don't have that many interesting fun facts, to be honest. I'll get through that in a moment, but hello. Technical consultant at the moment with Ergo. I say at the moment, I do all sorts of things. I'm pretty much a jack of all trades. I like to get involved in lots of different things, mostly because I like ideas and new things and innovation. So I don't tend to be the best for long-term projects, but I definitely will look at the latest stuff and tell you all about it, because I will get thoroughly stuck in about it and then tell you and move on. So it's one of my favorite things to do. My background in Dynamics is basically 10 years I've been working on it. So 2010 I started, and it was as an administrator. I think, like we've talked about it before, I think no one ever actually chooses a Dynamics or Power Platform, at least not yet. I think Microsoft are actually working on that, but certainly traditionally Dynamics is something you fall into, whether it be administrating it or whatever else. So I started in administration support, moved on from there to customizing, then moved on to a partner, started development, then worked my way up through that, then to consultant, and yeah, now technical consultant and manager. So I manage a group of people. So longer term, that's where I'm moving more into. I get very frustrated by inefficiency. It's one of the reasons why I'm quite interested in ALM and DevOps, just because it's the platform is rife with inefficiencies, export, import, zip files. It's nasty. So anything we can improve there, the better. It's one of the reasons I love PowerShell. If you don't like PowerShell, then you're listening to the wrong topic. It's a phenomenal tool. Also a local user group chapter leader here in Edinburgh. So myself and Ryan McLean. So we run that in Edinburgh. We haven't actually had another one. We're planning on doing it every 2 months, but the crisis has put a pause on that for the time being. But we'll work on that again. And dad. So became a dad to my son last year, and he's bringing every single day something new. At the moment, his latest thing is he's saying dum dum. He's actually starting to point at his dummy and say dum dum, which is nice. And he can stand on his own. Not quite walk yet, but he's standing without screaming, so that's progress. I love nothing more than just watching him with puzzles. It's just brilliant. So yeah, that's me. Contact details on the side if you're interested. Very basic agenda, as I said. So I'll just go through straight into it, really. First, I want to start with terminology is a big thing for me. I think that quite a lot of times we don't pay attention to proper terminology, especially when you're delivering a project. You really have to, at the very beginning, make sure that you understand business terminology. So what is it the business you're working with actually uses? I mean, they might call account, for instance, could be many different things. If you're working at a bank, it's someone's account. If you're working at a charity, it might actually be a customer account. It could actually be an organization. It's all sorts of different things. So it's important to get terminology right. I'm not entirely sure Microsoft have. So they've got an ALM guide. Well, that's what we're going through. ALM is application lifecycle management. It's the whole thing. It depends on who you speak to. Some people will say DevOps and ALM are interchangeable. Personally, it might be the case, but I think it's good to define these things. Application lifecycle management to me is the whole lifecycle, right from, as that diagram on the right shows, it's right from the planning, requirements, business analysis, all the way through the development iterations, not just one iteration, not just one waterfall development, it's the whole lot. So all of the iterations, right through to handover to support, right through to end of life. It's ALM is everything. DevOps is a small part of that. So DevOps to me is really the develop, build and test, deploy, elements of operate, elements of monitor and learn, but really it's those smaller parts of it. Then you get the confusion of the fact that we've got Azure DevOps, which is actually the tool called DevOps. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. DevOps, when I talk of DevOps, I'm talking about the people, process, and technology to continually provide value to customers. That's the definition for me of DevOps. Note that it is that combination. It's not just about tooling. So it's not all about the tools. It is arguably more about the process. You can do DevOps, I mean, proper DevOps, continuous integration, continuous delivery DevOps is about technology and automation where possible, where you can, as much as possible. But really, if you don't understand the process of what you're doing, or you haven't defined it, how can you automate it? So it's a mix of all of it. So that launches us into the guide. It's funny, when you do a search for ALM guide for Power Platform, that one in red, which is intentionally hard to read, is actually the first thing that popped up when I did a search, which is surprising to me because I haven't even come across it before. The second one, the first one in green, is the one we're actually going to go through. But if we just quickly pop that open. So this is actually the one that is currently in there, and this has popped in, but it's kind of a mini version of the other guide. So it's certainly worth having a look through, but this is not the one I'm going to go through right now, and it's not the one I've seen referenced elsewhere, but certainly worth a quick look through. It's the admin side of things that it's talking about there. So the one we are talking about is this. So
what one, the green one?
Yeah, the green one. So for anyone that has been following ALM and DevOps within Dynamics and Power Platform, you might well have come across the white paper from a few years ago, and then when there was an updated one for Power Platform a few years after that. So there has been an attempt by Microsoft in the past to talk about it. The documents are quite large. It goes into fair detail, but it's never really been fully adopted, I would say, in practice across the board, because there is no one way to do this. That's the thing that really jumps out. And what I find when trying to find more information about ALM and DevOps, and especially the tooling, there's not that many examples out there. And I think the main reason for that probably is the fact that the vast majority of pipelines, so for continuous integration and automated tooling in DevOps, a lot of that is custom PowerShell scripts. So that's the one thing to keep in mind. I think it is going to change. It's already starting to change. You're seeing a lot more interest in this, and you're seeing a lot more blog posts about it. A lot more people are talking about it. And with Microsoft's guide now coming out like this, Microsoft are putting more of a focus on it. But I don't think they're going to come out right and say, this is how you do it. And you'll see that in the guide. If you go through it, there are bits where it will say, this is one way to do it, this is another way to do it. They don't even necessarily go through pros and cons. They just tell you different ways of doing things. This is the first version. It's not just taking the white paper and shoving it into HTML. There is actually more in here than was in the white paper. But then there's also some in the white paper that hasn't made it into here. So it's still worth having a look through for that white paper and reading through that as well. It's like 70 pages, so maybe not fully reading through, skim through, but it's certainly worth having a look at. One of the first things that jumped out with the guide, I thought, was actually this ALM Basics is a good page to start at. The first time I looked at this, I kind of stopped there. For some reason, I just thought the page ended there. But actually, there's a lot of information further down, and it goes into the specifics. So for DevOps to work, you really, the core for the whole thing is source control. You have to be using source control for the automation side of things to be working. If you don't have your source control in place, don't have a strategy to work with that, branching strategy that says here, you're not going to easily be able to automate these things. So that's where you really have to start. And that is, there's a lot of tools out there there's one tool out there to really allow you to do that, but there's a lot of tools around that one tool. I'll get to that in a second, but that particular tool has been around for a long time, and that allows you to take the zip file that you would normally take out of Dynamics or Power Platform and expands it into XML files, which you can then source control. So the very first thing you should do, if you have nothing at the moment around DevOps, that's the first thing you do. Set up your source control, export your solutions, expand the zip files, stick that in source control. That's you started. That's you on the journey to actually having DevOps. And that doesn't matter what type of solutions you have. It doesn't matter how you got it set up. That's the first start. I caveat that if you are doing all your customizations in the default solution, then that's the first thing you do is get a solution, put everything in there. But I'm assuming we're not doing that. So yeah, source control is where it starts. And that is why it talks about it there. So there's various different diagrams in here, but I think the biggest way to learn and the best way to learn DevOps, especially the tooling, is to get hands-on with it and actually do things with it. One thing I've been finding that's quite interesting is, Claire actually mentioned it earlier, there's the TDG bank, I forget what the specific name is, but TDG is the Dynamics guys. There's a bunch of, it's another community in Dynamics. There's a website, and in there that actually, yes, that one. Yeah. Thank you. There's a lot of solutions that people have uploaded there for Canvas apps, for model-driven apps, for all sorts of things. It's worth even just having a look at those and importing them into a trial environment to get a feel for different solutions. If you're not used to doing things like so, especially if you have been working in development, maybe you only ever work on giant projects, you might not get a chance to really play with different things. If you work at a partner which is smaller, you might work with lots of different projects on a regular basis, maybe smaller implementations, but that means you don't deal with the enterprise side of things. So it's not, I would say that DevOps is not something you can easily learn on the job in terms of trying to catch up with everything that's going on. So you have to learn in your own time. That's my opinion on it anyway. And that is a good resource to do it because there's a lot of different solutions, a lot of different ways of doing things, and a lot of different zip files you can basically just import. So it's a good way to get started, to play with the different issues, components, and setups. It does go into, this document talks a lot about governance. Now, there's a good reason for that. Microsoft are transitioning from, for the Power Platform, they're transitioning from this concept of the citizen developer, which has driven the platform. I mean, the Power Platform is the way it is because, and let's be honest, because a bunch of Power users have jumped on it and started using SharePoint as a backend to replace their Excel formulas and documents. That's why we are where we are. But Microsoft is now starting to try to bring it back to a corporate world, try to bring it back into IT management. And so they're starting to really focus on governance, really focus on managing the environments, locking down as needed the different environments. Because at the moment, in a corporate world, if you do have the Power Platform in place, which a lot of people do, especially if they have Office, people can actually go and create apps. If you haven't done anything to try and lock that down, people will already be creating apps. And the Power Platform is what this guide is focused on. It's not just about model-driven apps. It talks a lot about model-driven apps, but it is talking about the Power Platform. It will expand on the Canvas app side of things. Right now, there's not a lot of DevOps functionality in that space, but that will be coming, so I'm told. So in here, it does talk a lot about governance, making sure you've got the right environments in place, so development and prod at the very least. But really, one of the key takeaways from this is actually what they are advocating is a build server strategy. So what you would have in that scenario is you have your development environment where you're doing your customizations and changes. You then package up your solution, you export the unmanaged solution into your source control, and then from there, the DevOps pipelines deploy that to a build server that no one ever touches. It only ever gets there through automation, and then the managed solution is exported out of that. So that is one of the things that I think does come across quite clearly in this. They do really advocate for that. It does talk about not having that, but it recommends to have it. Now, in the current world with the new licensing for CDS, it's actually much easier to do that sort of thing. So if you're not aware of it or you don't have access to it, you can actually spin up new environments in the cloud platform without having to pay a license for those environments anymore. It's based on capacity. So if you have the file storage available in your database or the database storage available, then you can spin up a new environment. And there are also now tools available, so APIs available for you to do that automatically. So we are getting to the point where in traditional DevOps automation tooling, you should not be, as Scott said recently, you should not be treating your environment as a pet. It shouldn't have a name. You shouldn't care about your environment. Your environment should be destroyable. You should be able to kill it and walk away and restart. We're a little way away from that, I think, and I think that scares a lot of people, certainly legacy dynamics. That's a big thing, but I do believe we are getting quite close to that with the tools that we have, and it is getting better. One of the things that Microsoft are working on for solutions that I've recently found out about. So one of the big problems with solutions is whatever components are in there, it has to deal with that when you import it. Even if the component's already in the target environment and hasn't changed, it still has to bring that in, has to check the dependencies, do all that work, which is why big solutions can be a big problem for importing. It takes forever. They're working on proper differential strategies so that if the component is in the solution and the target and they're the same, it will not do anything further with it. And apparently there's some great improvements they've made in that already. So soon, I think there's going to be a lot less resistance to the automated deployments. But again, that's the latest versions. I find still ALM and DevOps is difficult when you're on older versions because you're still dealing with older technology, and solutions have come a long way, but they're still a work in progress in many ways. This does not talk to that. This is very much the beginnings of looking forward. So bear that in mind. You're not going to find a lot in here that says, here's how you deal with solutions in version 8. So one of the core things you really have to do this properly, you have to understand solutions and how they layer, how the components change. And this is something that I think you just assume it works in a certain way. But of the 70 or 80 different components that are solution aware, so the things you can put into a solution, from entities to views to security roles, all of these different things are handled slightly differently. Assemblies, for instance, DLLs that are in there, totally different to entities in terms of how it deals with importing the updates. Another thing I highly encourage, and at some point I need to do some tests on and document it, but actually test what happens when you bring in different components in your environment. Don't just assume that the changes you make in your dev environment are going to come through in your production environment. You have to test these things. And so it definitely pays to make sure that you understand what's going on, and then you can automate it. But you have to understand what that component is going to do. What happens if you have another solution that has that component in it and you import that as a managed solution? You have to know the layering and how that works. So,
Reece, when you say component, do you mean entity or plugin? What are you talking about?
Anything. So solution components is the name of the actual the thing that is in your solution. So the solution is made up of XML files that contain all of the metadata for your components. So your entities, it is literally anything that you put in a solution is a component. Okay. So we're not talking PCF as such. That's just another component, but it's those things that you put in. They're all handled slightly differently. So a form, when you import that, will definitely do something different versus a field that you include. And you have to, one thing I've also found is that not every environment is exactly the same either. These are very complicated things. Over time, we make some crazy complicated solutions. So there's no one size fits all. However, there are, a lot of it is pretty well tested. So entities are pretty well tested, but exactly how they interact with other changes. And the other side of that is obviously the nasty unmanaged changes that you do in target environments. It still happens. I mean, one of the biggest bugbears, I think, for any partner is customers having admin access, because a customer will go in and make a change, but they might not know that that's what they're doing. It's very easy to make a change without actually knowing that that's what you're doing, or actually going and doing it because you want to change the option set. That breaks things. It actually does cause a lot of problems. And that's actually because of this unmanaged layer. This unmanaged layer sits above everything else. So if you're importing everything as managed solutions, as a good developer, as a good partner, and someone goes in and makes a change on a form or anything else, that sits above everything you do. So it looks like you've broken everything, because when you make a deployment, nothing changes. It's because someone has gone in there and made a change. And that will always appear above anything you've imported as a managed solution. So that's something I've noticed fairly recently. However, Microsoft are making that easier to understand, because in the solution editor now, you actually have a little button, which has been there for, I think, a couple of versions now, which is solution layers, I think it is. If you click on that, it'll actually show you the layering that impacts that particular component. So if you go to a workflow, for instance, click on that, it will actually show you which solution was the base import of that workflow. And if there's any unmanaged customizations, it'll show as an unmanaged layer at the very top. You can actually roll that back as well. So nowadays, some components you can do it with, not all components, but certainly workflows is one where you definitely can. I've seen this because workflows are one of the ones that always gets customized. But you can go to a workflow in the target. So in your production environment, someone's made a change, you can go there and you can actually just remove that layer. So the unmanaged solution, the unmanaged change just disappears, and the managed solution is the changes in the managed solution is what then emerges. So it's that, even that is getting better. One of the things I keep saying to people, especially who've been working with Dynamics for a long time, try the latest things, because you will be, we're all a little jaded with solutions. We've all been in a situation where there has been some kind of problem with a managed solution, whether it's on the import, whether it's some sort of dependency problem, whether it's some sort of third-party managed solution. There's always been problems, and there always will be problems. It's complicated stuff. However, the tools that are available to you nowadays are much better than they were in the past, and they're changing rapidly. So it's absolutely worth staying on top of the latest and making sure that you know what's going on there and doing the tests. So go through the solutions. The tools and apps is an interesting one. So in the guide, it very much talks Microsoft centric.
Reece, sorry, Reece, we've got 6 minutes left.
Yeah, so, I was just thinking that.
Well, have you got much more to go, or are you?
No, I think this can be my last point, happily, which is just this is a very good page to look at and make sure that you understand all of the tools that it talks about here. So especially things like configuration migration tool, package deployer. The config migration tool recently changed. I say recently, not that, probably about a year ago. And there's actually some really good things in there now. You can actually filter data, which used to be a problem with it. You actually can select certain records to pull out rather than everything for that entity. So it's worth having another look at that. Package deployer is very good. Solution packager, that's the core thing for pulling out your customizations into XML. So get to know that. If you don't know anything else, get to know that. But definitely spend time going through the tools page.
So for any beginners, it's go away and find out what solutions are and use them. For the intermediate folk, it's use the package downpacker, I guess, learn how to use that and downpack it to XML. And for the more advanced users, there's all these fun tools to go and learn about, I guess. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, you can get far at the moment with just tasks in DevOps. So you don't have to know PowerShell to get started with this. PowerShell makes things easier for a lot of things because you can do anything with PowerShell scripts. However, the two main tools out there for Visual Studio, for DevOps, is Weil Hamza's Dynamics 365 build tools, I think he calls it. Been there the longest, community driven. Weil Hamza is very good at what he does. Documentation is terrible, so you will not find a lot of information about it, but they're relatively easy tasks to understand, and there's a lot of options there. So absolutely look at those. The Microsoft Power Platform build tools, which is the other extension now the Microsoft are providing, they're good, and that's what the guide talks about. There's a lot more documentation because it's Microsoft. However, they're more limited. They're severely limited in some places. So you have to use both. At this point, it's really a good idea to understand what both those tools are giving you. But even just with those tools, you can get very far with pipelines and DevOps. You don't need to go down to the PowerShell route. Not till later on.
Cool. Can you dump those links and the tools that you mentioned just at the end there into the team site, just so that everybody that's on this call can go investigate afterwards? Yeah,
certainly will. I might actually. Should I put it in the wiki in the general room? That might be a good place to put it. DevOps tools or something like that.
Yeah, man, build out the knowledge share. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anybody in the call? Questions, comments? Have you used this tool before?